The following podcast is a Dear Media production.
So we're just going to dive right in.
Let's do it.
The first question I have is the link between food and cognitive decline, because I know that that's kind of like how you really got into this whole world, right? So how can we use food to ensure longevity? And I know this is a packed question.
Yeah, no, it's a great place to start. I mean, I guess the reason, just to give your audience a bit of context, the reason why I got interested in this was because my mom had a rare form of dementia that she developed early on. She was about 58 at the time. And I didn't go through medical school. I didn't study, like nutrition science as a PhD track. I became interested. I had a lifelong passion for fitness and nutrition, and I suppose I had a latent aptitude for understanding and communicating science. But I really decided to step my foot forward and help teach people publicly when my mom got sick. And I realized that this is a condition, dementia, that often begins in the brain decades before the first symptom of memory loss. Mm-hmm. And this is true for most...
Everything.
Yeah, everything. Like most... I can't think of a single chronic condition that begins like overnight.
Yeah, it's like it's been kind of like hanging out there for a long time, and maybe there's been like little symptoms, but you just kind of like let it go until like something serious happens.
Yeah, but most people, when they show up to the neurologist or the cardiologist and they get that diagnosis, they're like, why me? Well, you had years, if not decades, of runway to right the ship. And now granted, when it comes to the brain, there are many more unanswered questions than there are answered questions, but we now are at a point, I think, in the medical literature where we do have a semblance of a roadmap in terms of how we might live, how we might eat, to minimize our risk for Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common form of dementia, and potentially even other dementias as well. I mean, my mom had a form of dementia called Lewy body dementia, which is akin to having both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's at the same time. So it shares its pathology, I think, with there's a little bit of Alzheimer's going on, there's a little bit of Parkinson's going on, but when it comes to what's good for the brain, we do have some sort of salient, like pearls that we might adopt if brain health is something that matters to us. And it should matter to all of us, because all of us are at risk. Like whether or not you carry genetic predisposition for the condition, everybody is at risk. If you have a brain, you are at risk of developing cognitive decline today, unfortunately. So, I mean, I suppose it's important to lay out that there are different what are called modifiable risk factors. And this is according to a 2020 paper published in The Lancet that found that 40% of Alzheimer's cases are potentially attributable to these so-called modifiable risk factors, or dementia more broadly, all-cause dementia. And I think that's a conservative estimate, honestly, 40%. But basically what this paper published was that whether it's obesity, diabetes, hypertension, smoking, brain injury, excessive alcohol consumption, hearing impairment, social disconnect, depression, these are all conditions that essentially, or risk factors that fall under our control, hence the term modifiable, right? We have non-modifiable risk factors that we can't change. For example, gender. Yeah. Women are at twofold the risk as compared to men, unfortunately. We have our age, right? Age is still a major risk factor. And then we have our genes. But genes are actually, we can modify the expression of our genes. If you're genetically at risk for Alzheimer's disease here in the United States, you might move to a less industrialized part of the world and see that risk disappear. So
what's the term for it? Is it, I forget that, like, you're not doomed because of your genes. It's kind of, you can change your environment and certain factors to kind of help you kind of go around certain things. Like is it epigenetics?
Yeah. Basically the epigenome is thought to be this sort of this instructional layer that sits atop the genome. Epi means like above, so it's actually like the epigenome is like this layer of instructions that sit above the genome that regulate its expression. So you can't change your genes yet, unfortunately, but you can change the way that your genes express themselves. And so like the best way to describe it, how epigenetics kind of works, that I've heard, is that your genes load the gun, but it's your diet and your lifestyle that pull the trigger.
I've heard that as well. It's actually like a genius way of explaining it.
Yeah, I love that. Another way to think about it is like, the key is to kind of visualize like the keys on a piano, right? We all have like we all have like a full keyboard in our genome. We all have the notes that, if played in the right order, will produce Alzheimer's disease. But it's how you live and the foods that you eat potentially, and the various things that you're exposed to over the course of your life that will determine whether or not those notes get played. So to me, that's a very empowering message. And I happen to be a huge nutrition nerd. Like, that's like my passion. And so when it comes to nutrition, you have, basically, there are at least 3 areas where you have a ton of control. You can make sure that you're not obese. You can make sure that you're not type 2 diabetic or anywhere near that arena. And you can make sure that you don't have hypertension. Our diets also can influence, to some degree, our, whether or not we are chronically depressed, which is something that I talk a lot about in nutritional psychiatry. So that's another whole other area. But generally, like, our diets influence our metabolic health, which is super important, influence, the amount of fat that we're carrying around on us, which, as I mentioned, obesity is one of these risk factors. With our diets, we're eating literally the building blocks that our brains, use to create new brain cells.
Well, this is what's such an important factor of what you discuss on the regular, is that I don't think the average person realizes that food is so much larger than kind of how it makes you look. It really does. I mean, it determines the longevity factor, and how you feel in your older years, how you're battling disease or not, so it's like, it goes beyond this vanity metric, which people think of,
Yeah. I mean, food, it's so powerful. Like, it can help you look better naked. Like, I mean, I eat in a way, when I'm making choices, right, I'm cognizant of the fact that I want to look good. I want to feel good. I want to perform well. But I also want to have mental energy, right? I want to have cognitive clarity. I want to age well. And so, yeah, I mean, food definitely has the power to influence all of those different facets of what it means to live healthily today.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to be said there. So what are your favorite, for someone who's just like new to you, what are your favorite foods for kind of cognitive health?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I'm pretty adamantly pro whole plant consumption, but also pro whole, like, animal consumption. Like, I'm both.
I'm gonna get into this. Yes, It's the first thing I said. The vegan thing.
But here's the thing: is that I think that I'm super balanced in my message, but people have these like diet tribes. And I tend to butt heads a lot with the online vegan community because I'm just unapologetic in my stance that a vegan diet is not optimal from the standpoint of the brain. There's no evidence of that. And that animal products are incredibly healthy, right? Like, there's just all this corporate vested interest now in steering consumers away from animal products, right? Whether it's like the nut milks that, look, I love a good almond milk latte. Like, I'm not anti-nut milk or anything like that. But the thing is, for these ultra-processed, industrialized food-like products to be good for you, something has to be bad for you, right? For almond milk to be the ideal milk in your refrigerator, dairy milk has to be bad, right? For the Beyond Burger, for the Impossible Burger to be the ideal meat substitute, right? It's got to be because red meat is bad for you, right? For Just Egg, right? I was like driving down La Cienega and there's a billboard literally saying that, like, if your cardiologist could make you breakfast, he'd use Just Egg, which is basically this canola oil mung bean frankenfood.
Well, how did we even get here though? Like, insane. Can you, like, how did we get to the point where eggs are demonized? And by the way, like, I think if someone wants to be plant-based for ethical choices or whatever, like, power to them. No, like, there's like nothing wrong with that. But I was vegetarian for years when I was in high school because, I felt bad about like animals dying or whatever.
Yeah.
I was so sick, Max, like so sick. And the thing is that I thought that I was making the right choices for my body. And I was like, I couldn't understand why I was feeling that way. And it was because I was severely anemic and I was just getting worse because I was having no meat. And so it's crazy that we're at this place where these, like, it's just sad that we're at a place where like these foods, just like regular foods, are being demonized for something else.
100%. Yeah. And there's like, there are enough voices out there promoting plants and like the marketing, the food industry does a good enough job of that. That's not a big focus for me. I actually focus a lot on trying to dispel myths surrounding animal products. And I'm not on the dairy board. Like, I don't get paid by Big Beef or anything like that. I just think it's super, super important. And, my mom was somebody who aspired to live healthily her whole life. And she was attuned very much to whatever messaging would come out over the course of her life about cardiovascular disease prevention, heart disease prevention. And so she ate a diet that was largely devoid of animal products. I mean, she wasn't a vegan, but she never ate any red meat ever. She was also a big, animal rights activist. And so she steered far clear from red meat. She never ate any eggs and never any butter or anything like that. Just always, if it had a red Heart Healthy logo on it, that was something that my mom, chances are, would be putting in her shopping cart. And so, I think a lot of these foods, these ancestral foods, have a lot to offer in terms of their healthiness.
So can you actually go into some of the myths that people hear around animal products, such as, for example, let's start with red meat, because I know that is one that I don't think most people realize how much it has to offer. It's kind of been fed to us as, oh, like, it's so bad. And, there's all of these like propaganda like documentaries as well, which people don't realize that there's like a lot of propaganda, and they don't realize like maybe how they should be looking at beef consumption, whether it's like grass-fed, grass-finished, there's regenerative farming. So if you can get into that piece a little bit, I think it would be so helpful. Yeah, absolutely. So red meat, I mean, a lot of people are afraid of the saturated fat that it contains, the cholesterol that it contains. For one, all natural fat-containing foods contain some proportion of saturated fat and of unsaturated fat. And within the unsaturated fats, you have polyunsaturated fats, or PUFAs, and then you have your monounsaturated fats, or MUFAs. And when you actually look at the fat composition, the fatty acid composition of beef, it's not, the majority of it is not saturated fat. In fact, dairy has proportionally the highest percentage of saturated fat of any natural fat-containing product. Beef is about 50% monounsaturated fat, which is the type of fat found in olive oil and avocado oil. And then you get some proportion of saturated fat, as well as the unsaturated fats. Now, even among saturated fats, which again is like the fatty acid category that people tend to be afraid of, a fat is not a fat. So there are some saturated fats that will raise your cholesterol, right? And we can talk about whether or not that's a bad or good thing or a neutral thing. And then there's some saturated fats that don't. So, for example, grass-fed beef has a higher proportion among its saturated fat constituents of fatty acid called stearic acid, which is completely neutral from the standpoint of cardiovascular health, and probably in fact beneficial. They've shown that it actually can boost mitochondrial function. So, what a cow eats matters, and when you actually look at outcomes, which I think is the most important thing. There was a paper that came out, and it was met with fierce opposition from, researchers who are deep in the pockets of the plant-based food industry. But it found that there's really no good evidence when looking at randomized control trials to say that red meat has even processed red meat has any negative impact on health outcomes. And their recommendations the paper was called NutriRex. Actually said that there's no reason that people should moderate their consumption of red meat or eat any less than they're currently eating. There's no evidence. There was a 2021 meta-analysis that found no evidence that red meat is inflammatory. Certain saturated fats will raise your cholesterol, but there are benefits that you're getting from eating red meat as well. As you know, I mean, you were anemic, right? Anemia affects 25% of the global population, and half of those cases are due to iron deficiency. Yep. Red meat is like the most bioavailable source of iron, heme iron, right? It's a wonderful source of creatine, which helps with brain energy metabolism. It's, we mentioned iron, protein. It's like a pristine source of dietary protein, vitamin E. It's a pretty small, but I mean, you get some omega-3s from it. It's not like a major omega-3 source, but then you get all these other like nutrients that aren't necessarily essential, but are thought to benefit human health, like taurine, creatine. I mentioned creatine, carnitine, carnosine. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's like health food, and and it's a food that we've co-evolved with. Now the question is like, should we be eating fatty meat all the time? I think that there's a good argument to be made for eating leaner red meat.
I'm not one of these like guys that you see like in the paleo community, for example, or the keto community that's just like fatty cuts of meat all the time. Although I do enjoy a ribeye, like I think that's a super tasty dinner, for me oftentimes. But a cow is like a human invention. Like we created cows, and cows are fattier than any of its predecessors. Like bison, for example, bison is much leaner. Wild game is super lean. So I think that there's an argument to be made for like leaner red meat, not super lean, but yeah, again, I think it's a health food. It's loaded with nutrients. It's one of the most nutrient dense foods that we have.
So I have 2 follow-up questions. The first is, if someone is, they're okay with eating red meat, but they're unsure about the environmental impact that it has.
Yeah.
How can they ensure that they aren't doing damage there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm definitely not an expert in agriculture. And I say that because I'm not sure, like it doesn't, like the environmental footprint doesn't really matter in terms of what I personally choose to eat, nor does it influence the health recommendations that I make for people. Because if I think about, if I were a physician, right, it would be immoral for me to sit across from a sick patient and to have my recommendations to that patient be guided by anything other than what's going to be the best for their health.
Fair.
Right?
Yep, that's a really good point.
Yeah. So I will say that like red meat factory, the factory farm system is terrible for the environment, right? And there's debate over like, whether pasture-raised meat, grass-fed meat is truly environmentally positive the way that some claim. I've been to regenerative farms, and to me it seems like cows are part of the environment. It seems like this is like something that just there's absolutely nothing unnatural about this. And so can we create a farming system that allows everybody on Earth to eat the same proportion of grass-fed meat? I'm not sure about that. But I still think that like not everybody's going to want to eat red meat, right? So like not everybody, we shouldn't assume that everybody's going to want to have the same exact diet anyway.
So how can then someone just go and ensure that they're buying the highest quality red meat? Like what are you looking for when you're at the grocery store?
I try to buy 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. That's going to be the best for the environment. And it's also going to be the best for you. But here's the thing, like even factory farmed meat is like good for you. It's like even factory farmed meat is a great source of protein.
So you would rather basically eat factory farmed meat versus be vegan?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And the thing is, you can opt for, when it comes to the healthiness of it, you can, again, opt for leaner, because what a cow eats dictates primarily what's in its fat.
Yeah.
The protein is pristine, and it's not going to change much based on what the cow eats.
Oh, that is really interesting. I didn't realize that. Wow.
Yeah. But it's the fat composition. So like, as I mentioned, with grass-fed beef, you're going to get a higher proportion of grass-fed, grass-finished beef. You're going to get a higher proportion of stearic acid. You're going to get lower overall fat. So it's going to be a leaner animal. Grass-fed, grass-finished beef has 5 times the omega-3s. It's got 3 times the vitamin E. So it's definitely better for you, better for the planet to go for the grass-fed, grass-finished. But if you were to buy like a leaner cut of meat from a supermarket, if you didn't have access or you couldn't afford grass-fed beef, and it wasn't grass-fed, grass-finished, it wasn't the most pristine source of beef, I still think that's a better option for dinner for most people than like boxed mac and cheese. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So we can't be like too, I think, exclusionary in the recommendations that we make.
So what about people who have been taught that they can get the same protein content from a plant-based diet versus a diet that also includes animal products? Like, is that, can you bust that myth, quote unquote?
Yeah, well, animal protein is definitely higher quality.
Yep.
So there's no debating that. It's got a higher proportion of essential amino acids. It's got a higher proportion of branched chain amino acids like leucine, which is really important.
It's so important.
Yeah, for stimulating muscle protein synthesis. You really can't beat the digestibility of animal protein. You can look at there are a number of different, there are 2 primary scoring methods that are used to determine the digestibility of protein. There's the digestible, indispensable amino acid scoring system. And then there's the protein digestibility corrected amino acid scoring system. And they both, no matter where you look, animal protein is at the top. soy is maybe like up there somewhat, you know.
How do you feel about like the I guess like the hormonal implications of soy? Do you feel like it's enough to have a conversation around it?
You know, it's unclear. It doesn't seem like it's as bad as people think it is, but there was a study that found that when you gave men either soy or whey protein post-workout, it was the soy that led to a blunted testosterone effect. We don't know. I think we don't know how that plays out over the long term, whether or not that has any meaningful impact on body composition or anything like that. But it's definitely like, it's not hormonally inert.
Right.
What the consequences of chronic soy consumption, you know, what that might lead to, I don't think we know. So, you know, for me, I don't consume any I don't consume a lot of soy. I consume like soy sauce with sushi. Yeah. That's pretty much it. And when I do, I try to make sure that the soy that I'm consuming is organic. But yeah, animal protein is like, for protein, animal protein is by far like the best option. Now, when it comes to the quality of a protein, you know, that's not controversial. But protein quality matters mostly for people that are eating low protein diets. So vegans and vegetarians that are consuming low protein diets, the fact that they're eating primarily or exclusively plant protein, that does matter because it's a lower quality protein. When you're eating a sufficient amount of protein, the protein quality doesn't really matter as much because you're just getting like amino acids from everywhere. So that's why I think in the context of omnivory, it doesn't really matter so much where you're getting your protein from. But if you're eating a lower protein diet, so if you're vegan, vegetarian, eating a lower protein diet, you really ought to be concerned about where your protein is coming from. And also if you're elderly, you know, like if you're an older person, people in their advanced years tend not to eat a ton of protein. And so it really becomes important, like protein quality, again, making sure that you're opting primarily for animal protein.
So then if someone is more plant-based and they want to stay away from animal products, what are some what's the highest quality of protein that you would recommend to someone?
Well, I would say soy is pretty high quality, at least in terms of the digestibility and the leucine content. Actually, corn protein, we might see this on the market in a few years, and I don't know, what the health outcomes are going to be, of somebody who eats a lot of corn protein, but I think corn has the highest proportion of leucine of any plant.
Really?
Yeah. But just imagine like how processed that's going to have to be. So that's not something that I'm probably going to consume. But if you actually look like into the literature, corn has like the highest proportion of leucine. It's kind of weird. But yeah, it's just not a commonly consumed source of protein. But yeah, I think soy is very high quality. You want to go for organic because it's one of these like crops that just is like so sprayed.
Sprayed, yeah.
And protein powders. I mean, most vegans like do really well with protein powder. I'm concerned about plant-based protein powders because they tend to harbor heavy metals. How much they harbor and whether or not.
Wait. We gotta zoom in on that a little bit. What the hell do you mean?
So plant-based protein, they're just so processed. And plants suck up, their plants are a great source of minerals, but they also suck up whatever other metals are in the soil, right, that they're being grown in. And so it's pretty easy to find literature that shows that plant protein powders contain heavy metals. Like they contain, I'm forgetting exactly which ones, maybe cadmium, arsenic, lead. I mean, we know that brown rice is a big arsenic source. So if your protein powder has brown rice protein, good chances there's arsenic.
Holy crap. I did not know that. That's fucking wild.
No, it's significant. You don't get that in whey protein. Whey protein is a very clean protein.
So you like whey protein then?
I like whey protein.
Okay, can you tell me your favorite brand?
Well, I don't have any brand like affiliations, so just to put that out there.
No, I know, but like just curious.
Yeah. What am I currently using? I'm currently using like a Garden of Life whey. It's like whey, grass-fed whey, vanilla flavored. But I also really like Kion makes a whey protein that's really good. I was using Muscle Feast for a while.
That sounds so bro-y.
Yeah, it's so bro-y. It's called Muscle Feast. I know. It's just whey protein, and it's like there's no artificial sweeteners or anything like that. So it's
And so then how do you feel about pea protein, also in the same heavy metal category as well, you would say?
Yeah, I would just be like cautious. Like occasionally now and then, like one of those protein powders I think is totally fine. The dose makes the poison with these things, right? So if it's the kind of thing, like I do whey protein every single day for the most part. Sometimes multiple times a day. I'm having like multiple scoops. So if I were using like a plant-based protein with that frequency, then I would be like pretty concerned about it. And I do recommend protein like every day. Like, protein is like a really great, I don't really consider protein powder, I consider it a food product. And a really like beneficial one at that, especially for people who are on plant-based diets.
So then what about people who have whey protein and it hurts their stomach? Like, is that like what's going on there? Like, why does that even happen?
It could be because of additives in the protein. It could be because, there could be some like lactose intolerance. There could be some casein sensitivity. What I recommend for people is to go for whey protein isolate. So there's different kinds of whey proteins. Primarily what you'll find is whey protein concentrate and whey protein isolate. You'll also find in some protein powders like milk protein isolate. So you just want to make sure that if you think that you have a dairy sensitivity, to look for whey protein isolate and make sure that it's 100% whey protein isolate. Because what that is, it's the cleanest, in air quotes, it's the cleanest form of whey, where they strip out all lactose, all casein, and you're just getting this like really pure protein.
Very cool.
So any of the like components of dairy that might be giving you issues are generally not present in whey protein isolate.
Interesting. And how do you feel about collagen protein powders?
I think collagen is good. I take maybe 10 or 20 grams of collagen every day.
Do you feel like it's a good enough substitute for whey protein, for example? Or like if someone is, I guess plant-based, they're maybe having more of the C one, but you know, like if they're not wanting to have whey, for example, do you feel like collagen protein is like good enough?
It's not a good replacement. It's a good add-on, but it's not a sufficient replacement.
Why is that?
Because it doesn't have, it's not a complete protein, and it has very low levels of leucine, which is like the really the protein that you want. What it does have, it has very high levels of glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, which are really, I think, beneficial amino acids, but they're not essential. So, it's a great sort of additive. It's a great, I think it's probably very valuable to get more glycine into your diet, for example. But when it comes to like whole complete protein and and performing I think the primary function that we want protein to perform when we ingest it is to help, our body composition, right? To help support our muscle tissue, to help, offer that satiety effect. And collagen, it's like if you have a finite supplement budget, I would prefer you spent it on like a good whey protein, or even a plant-based protein, as opposed to a collagen protein. But if you can afford both, I think that's a great option.
Since we are already on this topic of like various proteins, apparently this is where this conversation is going.
I love it.
I saw that post that you did about salmon, which I thought was, by the way, really good. And anyone who doesn't follow Max, like go look at that post that he did. But can you explain the different kinds of salmon and what someone should be looking for when they're buying salmon?
Yeah, salmon, that's such a good question. Salmon's such a healthy food. And just, just so people know, fish consumption, we all love to hate on fish, right? It contains microplastics. Our oceans are incredibly polluted, and we hear stories of like overfishing. Fish is still one of the healthiest foods that you can eat. It's great for your brain. When it comes to the brain, fish is medicine. It's great for mental health. And salmon it's a wonderful food. And even farm-raised salmon, it's not ideal. It's in fact far from it, but it's still, again, I like to compare it to like some of these like dinners that like I know that people are getting, like the ultra processed like boxed mac and cheese like that I grew up eating. Like that was like my dinner many nights of the week as a kid. Even farm-raised salmon is going to be a better option for dinner than that. So when it comes to the different types that you'll see in your average supermarket, you get Atlantic salmon, which is generally going to be farmed because it's now actually, I believe, illegal to fish in the Atlantic for salmon. And then there are three other types. You've got your king salmon.
Coho, I think, is the other one.
Coho, and then sockeye.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all beneficial. They're all an amazing source of omega-3 fatty acids. You also get this really powerful antioxidant called astaxanthin in salmon, which is what's responsible for its like the characteristic red color. Sockeye salmon is really good. It's the most sort of like gamey. Like, I don't know, I would compare it to like, it's like the grass-fed beef of salmon. It's like a stronger flavor. I don't know if it's for everybody. But
what's the salmon that you were buying at the grocery store?
I I like sockeye. Sockeye is great. And when I eat out in restaurants, I'm eating generally like whatever they have, which is like
It's probably farmed.
it's probably farmed Atlantic salmon. So yeah, I mean, I definitely like eat that. I think many times a month. Because I love sushi and I love, I go out to eat. And when I cook at home, I tend to cook steaks and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sockeye salmon I think is great. They have now you can buy it frozen at like Costco. I'm a Butcher Box member, so like I get sometimes
Love
like
Butcher Box.
yeah, like bags
So
of
good.
it, frozen sockeye salmon. So it's just a little bit more dense and a little bit like more gamey, but it's like really tasty, super tasty, super super healthy, and generally I'm pretty sure it's always going to be wild if you find sockeye salmon.
What are some other health myths that you want to bust? Like what like really bugs you?
Man, there's a lot out there, but I think like, the whole like, I mean, I guess like people know at this point, like I'm not a fan of the push towards like these plant-based fake foods, whether it's like the Beyond Burger or the Just Egg. But I guess like, I'm not a fan of dietary dogmatism. You see that all the time within the nutrition space. Like you have to be either on a keto diet or a vegan diet, or you have to intermittent fast to reach whatever your goals happen to be. And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years of being so deeply immersed in this field is that personal preference really does reign supreme. Like you've got to find something that's gonna work, right, and be sustainable for you. And I don't mean sustainable like I'm happy eating all the junk food that I'm currently eating. Like it's got to work for you both in terms of like being good for your soul, but also your body. And so for me, I think like there are so many ways like up the mountain that ultimately, rather than try some kind of like fad fringe diet, it's really, I think, crucial to experiment, to iterate, and ultimately to find something that you can stick to.
I actually love that you talk about this because it's such a conversation now around fitness, right? Because I remember when I was younger, it was like, you have to run. You have to run to be fit. And that is really like the only thing. And
that's a great one, yeah.
I was like, what, am I just like gonna be unfit for the rest of my life because I fucking hate this?
Yeah.
Or like I'm just gonna go like run on the treadmill and I'm just gonna hate my life for however long I'm doing it for. And it wasn't until I, got a little older and started experimenting with different forms of movement that I found ones that I really enjoyed. And that is the only thing that led to like sustainable and a really good relationship with fitness and my body, Whereas I think that this is less talked about from the nutrition standpoint where, I feel like people don't necessarily think of it as like good for their soul as well,
Yeah, no, you're super right. And when it comes to like finding a workout that works for you, yeah, you got to do something that like that gets you excited, right? Like to go to the gym. And I know some people out there are listening to this and they're like, nothing makes me excited to go to the gym.
That's not true. They've just like not found the right thing.
You haven't found the thing.
Yeah,
you haven't found the thing. And I do think that there is some value in pushing yourself and also to kind of lower the bar and to reduce the friction. Like, for example, I really related to what you said about like hating running. I generally hate running. It's like I have been lifting weights for as long as I can remember. I've been like going to the gym. My favorite thing to do is to have my headphones in or even without headphones and just like kind of zone out and lift weights. I love it.
Well, like, see, I mean, at least you knew from a young age that was an option. Like I remember in high school, it was like, don't go near the weights. And I fucking love weightlifting now.
Yeah, of course. And I love that. More girls need to work out and lift weights. It's super important. But I've recently started, recently I've been trying to get like at least to integrate running to like somewhat more like into my workout routine. And
wait, why?
Well, because I think cardio, because, you can get a cardio workout from your weight training workout. There's no doubt about that. But I think like the research when it comes to like deliberate sustained cardiovascular exercise, it's hard to ignore that it does seem to benefit you in many different ways, whether it's like from a brain health standpoint, so something sustained, and
so you wouldn't put something like boxing in that category?
Oh no, I would absolutely put boxing.
Yeah, because I love that.
Yeah.
I just don't like running.
Yes, boxing is pretty intense though.
Yeah.
Boxing is pretty intense. So like,
but it's so fun.
Yeah, it's so fun. I love boxing. Boxing's great. So yeah, that's a good option. That's a great option. I was boxing for a while with a private trainer, and then I stopped doing that a couple months ago. And so I found that my exposure to like cardiovascular exercise was like getting I was like just it had become like somewhat reduced. And so what I've done was I tried to set this like goal for myself of running a mile, just a mile, 2 or 3 times a week. And, when you get better at something, so like what I find is that cardio, it's like you get better pretty quickly, especially if like your baseline is like nothing. Like I wasn't running before. And like at first, when I first got on the treadmill, running a mile was like pretty difficult. Like it's not fun, and I get bored really easily. My mind wanders, and I want to get off that thing almost as soon as I step on it. But you get better really quick at it. And then I think there's this tendency when you get good at something, you want to do it, you think that you should set like these new goals for yourself. But I actually was really careful to not let myself fall into that trap, because what happens is you run a mile, right? And then next week you can run a mile and a quarter, and the week after that you can run a mile and a half, and then ultimately you're able to run 2 miles. And then you feel like you might as well not work out if you can't run those 2 miles. And so what that does, it continually increases the bar for yourself, and it makes it easier to say, you know what, fuck it, I'm not going to do it at all if I have to run 2 miles, right? Or whatever that is. So what I've tried to do for myself is I say, okay, even though my cardio like endurance is getting better, I'm just going to run a mile. Like maybe some days I'll be able to run. If I really want to push it, I'm not going to say no to my body, right? I'm going to let myself run a mile and a half. But the bar for me is just a mile 3 times a week. And I've been keeping it up, actually. I've been doing it for the past like 2 months, and it's been really like beneficial for me. I find myself like feeling better in my body. Like my joints actually feel pretty good.
I actually like that you bring up this like concept of just that mile, because I don't know if you've read the book, The Artist's Way. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
So that book, it talks about journaling, and it's 3 pages, no matter what. It doesn't matter if you want to do more, and it doesn't matter if you want to do less. You just do the 3 pages.
Interesting, yeah.
And it's like the same kind of concept where like that's kind of what makes sure that it stays a habit. Whereas like say like then you get to the 10 pages one day, and then you're like, well, I have to do 11 tomorrow.
Right.
Who has time for that?
Right,
you know?
exactly.
So,
because eventually you're going to say, oh, fuck it. And then you fall off the wagon, and then, you succumb to inertia, right? And then you stop doing it. And the thing is, you want to do something that you can sustain, that you can continue doing, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think by setting myself that goal of a mile 3 times a week, it's just something that's like totally within reach.
Are you also doing zone 2 cardio, or would you consider that run zone 2 cardio, or like do you care about it at all? Because I know that there is a lot of conversation around its benefits for longevity as well.
Yeah, I am not super. So my understanding of zone 2 cardio is just like cardio that you can sustain.
Yeah.
That you can basically do like while still holding a conversation.
Yeah.
Is that generally it? Yeah. So I mean, I think like it's probably a little bit more intense for me than zone 2, but it's almost like a good test that I will do for myself. Like when I'm running, I try to breathe through my nose as long as possible. I try to really like push it so that I'm not like mouth breathing until like I really need to. And I feel like maybe that's a good sort of indicator of whether or not you're in zone 2 or progressing to a higher zone. I don't know. I'm definitely not an expert in that, but
smart.
Yeah.
Very cool. I also want to talk to you about alcohol. Now,
Okay.
this is a hot topic.
It is.
And as someone who's in the health and wellness space, do you drink? How often? And like if someone is drinking, can they do things before and after drinking? Like what can they drink? Any recommendations there?
Yeah, I do. I drink like very seldom, but I'm not dogmatic about it. I do drink occasionally, like handful of times a month. Like definitely not on a weekly basis, but I want to be able to enjoy. Like if somebody tells me that this is an incredible glass of wine, or bottle of wine, I want to be able to taste it, like and have a glass and enjoy it, right, and not feel guilt about it or anything like that. The truth is, though, that alcohol, ethanol, which is what gives us the buzz, which is what we're seeking when we have a drink, is a neurotoxin, and it's associated with, certain cancers and things like that. So I don't think that it's good for you necessarily. I think the thinking used to be that moderate drinking, which was 1 to 2 glasses a night for men, 1 per night for women, was associated with health benefits. But I think I think ultimately it's a person's ability to be moderate that's associated with better health, particularly with something like alcohol. There was a study that found that even among moderate drinkers, people that drank moderately, so these are people that don't have problems with alcohol, that there was about 3 times the hippocampal atrophy, so atrophy in the memory processing center of the brain, compared to alcohol abstainers. So, it's something that I think, and again, moderation, just to define that, 1 to 2, it's like drink a drink at least every night, which is like, even that to me sounds like way too much.
Yeah, that's like, I would never.
Yeah, right? So I do think that there is a point where you can enjoy alcohol, and if you don't let it affect your sleep, and you hydrate, and it doesn't, lead to unhealthy food choices, I think that there's probably a level that you can drink that probably has no downside to you. But then also, alcohol is a means for people to de-stress. It is a social lubricant, right? Like it does break the ice, like when you're going out on those initial dates with somebody. So I do think that there are non-trivial benefits to drinking alcohol, but the ethanol itself is definitely not healthy. So that's why, if you don't currently drink, there's absolutely no reason to start.
Yeah. Well, if someone is drinking, like, is there a specific kind of alcohol that is better than others? How do you kind of put it into a scale?
So clear alcohols generally are thought to be healthier. They have a lower concentration of what are called congeners, which are the impurities in colored alcohol that are thought to produce hangovers and things like that.
I'm very glad that tequila is my drink of choice.
Yeah. Well,
it's with no hangovers.
Yeah, it's mine too. I like a good like tequila blanco.
Yeah.
And I like the occasional wine as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would go for like a clear spirit. I avoid beer. Beer is super high in purines, or purines. I forget how it's pronounced, but basically like can increase levels of uric acid, which isn't good. It's like drinking liquid bread.
Yeah,
essentially.
I was gonna say it's. I don't get it. I don't really like it very much at all. So.
Yeah, well, it's just like a 1-2 punch to the gut too,
Yeah.
because it's got gluten in it and it's got this toxic alcohol in it. So it's just it's no bueno. But these clear spirits, I think, are fine. Wine, I think, is fine. You want to make sure that you're hydrating in between each drink.
Yeah, of course.
And my general strategy is like whether I'm having 1 drink or 2 drinks or even 3 drinks, like I'm trying to sober up before I go to sleep. That's generally it.
That's actually a really important point, because sometimes people drink and then they get drowsy and they go to sleep, but your quality of sleep is horrible.
Yeah.
Like, it's not good, high quality sleep. Like, you just can't get it when you have so much alcohol in your system.
100%. And people get misled by alcohol. They think that it's their friend because it reduces what's called sleep latency. So it helps you get to bed quicker, but it greatly reduces sleep quality.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of people, they think that, the occasional nightcap is doing their body some sort of favor, but it's not, because it's reducing sleep quality.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. The last thing I have for you is actually coffee. And I thought of it as we were talking about alcohol, because I feel like, that there's also a lot of kind of back and forth around coffee. Do you drink coffee?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I try to take breaks from it occasionally, but right now I'm on it. And
Yeah.
I love coffee, and I also very much distinctly remember like the times when I'm like off coffee and how much I love being off coffee as well. So it's another one of these things that you just have to kind of like forge your own relationship with. I think it's really important that people realize that coffee is a drug and to treat it as such.
Oh, fuck.
But yeah, but no, I love coffee, and the research on coffee is actually really positive. Like,
Yeah.
people who drink coffee seem to be protected from cardiovascular disease, from Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis. So there's all these benefits associated with coffee drinking, but it is a stressor. So if you're the kind of person who has chronic psychological stress and you're fasting regularly and you're regularly doing really high intensity exercise, you just kind of have to be mindful of all of those different variables, which can tip the cup over, right, and lead to burnout. But in general, yeah, I'm a huge fan of coffee. I drink it these days with heavy cream. I'm a big fan of heavy cream, which I think is like this incredible underappreciated coffee additive. Again, we're being pushed towards these like plant-based creamers and things like that, but I think heavy cream is like the ultimate coffee creamer. It's got all these like beneficial micronutrients in it. There's no protein, it's just pure fat, so it's like not gonna spike your insulin or technically break your fast by elevating some of these like protein sensitive pathways in the body.
So then, on that note, how do you feel about Bulletproof Coffee then?
That's a good question. I think it's, how do I feel about it? I'm actually speaking at the Bulletproof, or not that it's no longer called the Bulletproof Conference. It's called the Biohacking Conference. And I like Dave. I think Bulletproof Coffee is delicious. However, I think that butter for me is more of a YOLO food. And I've changed my perspective on it.
Yeah, why is that?
Yeah, because butter is one of these foods that, basically, like, so as I mentioned, dairy is, percentage-wise, it's got the highest proportion of saturated fat of any other natural fat-containing food, right? So you'd think that consumption of dairy, right, would be associated with worse cardiovascular health, right? If saturated fat is so bad and dairy has like the highest percentage. But actually, paradoxically, people who consume more full-fat dairy have better cardiovascular health, have better metabolic health. So dairy fat seems to be this like fantastically healthful fat, right? And one of the reasons why it's been proposed that dairy fat is so good for us is because the dairy triglycerides are encapsulated in this bubble called milk fat globule membrane, which is a mouthful, but it affects essentially how we metabolize those fats, right? Butter, in the process of making butter, that membrane is disrupted. And so you don't get the milk fat globule membrane in butter. And so for this reason, you see they've done clinical trials where they've fed people both heavy cream and butter, which butter comes from heavy cream, right? It's just churned cream. And what they see is the butter leads to an adverse effect on blood lipids, like LDL cholesterol, whereas cream doesn't. So I'm not saying that that's reason to never eat butter again, but you know, it's one of those foods that's like, it's actually, butter's a man-made creation, right? Like nature makes dairy and like, actually it also ferments dairy and gives us things like cheese and the like. But butter is something that we make, and I think that it's, the research on butter is like this unique source of dairy fat that might not actually be as good for us. And so now it's like one of those like YOLO foods for me that I eat in moderation, and it's still super tasty. I'm not saying that we need to like go home and throw out our butter. But I'm a huge fan of dairy fat, with the exception of, or not with the exception, but with this sort of caveat that butter is a little bit different from your run-of-the-mill dairy fat.
Maybe I'm going to try and make my bulletproof coffee with cream and MCT oil now.
Yeah, well, the other thing, here's the thing. So butter, part of the reason why you pour cream into coffee and it disperses perfectly is because of that membrane, because of the milk fat globule membrane. Butter, if you put butter in coffee, it sits at the top and you have to blend it to make bulletproof coffee, right? It's because the milk fat globule membrane, which is this, essentially it's a lipoprotein that keeps the fats in dairy suspended in water, right? Because think about like blood, right? Blood and milk are kind of similar in the sense that both are mostly water, but then you've got these fats, right? Both in blood and in milk that stay perfectly suspended, right? Are completely and effortlessly dissolved within that like mostly aqueous medium. Because in our blood we have what are called lipoproteins that send around triglycerides and cholesterol and things like that. So it doesn't look like, you don't have like oil rising to the top, right? Same thing with dairy. You've got this lipoprotein, which is called milk fat globule membrane, but when you disrupt it, then you get butter, and so that's why the butter sits at the top. And I think heavy cream is just, it's more convenient. You just pour it in your coffee and you stir it.
I actually don't think I've ever put heavy cream in coffee.
Try it.
Like, I know that it's like a thing, but I just never did it because I'm usually like an Americano girl or like a Bulletproof. That's like the most I'll do with my coffee. But now I'm going to try the heavy cream thing. You've kind of sold me on it.
It hits different. It's good. Yeah, it's tasty. It kind of has like a little bit of like an ice cream vibe.
Okay, what? Okay, I'm doing this tomorrow.
Yeah. I love it. I love heavy cream. It's better than, half and half is half heavy cream and half whole milk. So it's basically just like a watered down version of heavy cream, of heavy cream. So if you want to like go for the full experience, just go buy heavy whipping cream.
Okay, I'm doing this tomorrow.
Yeah, it's bomb.
Okay, cool. So before we wrap, I want to do a quick rapid fire.
Okay, down.
So first question, what is a habit that's a non-negotiable for you?
Man, a habit that's a non-negotiable for me. I like to take my time waking up. Some people are just like up and at 'em, like super early morning workouts. Not for me. I like to like check my email, drink my coffee, roll around with my cat. So yeah, I like my sort of like my current morning ritual.
Fair. What is one book that changed your life? And you can't say yours, Max.
No, mine definitely changed my life. Man, a book that changed my life. I mean, I think Sapiens was one of them, certainly. Sapiens was just a beautifully written book about our sort of evolution and how we came to be, Homo sapiens. And it's, well written, super witty, lots of like interesting takeaways.
Okay, I gotta read it. I think you're the second person who's given me that answer, so I feel like I need to read that book.
It's pretty good.
That's what I hear.
I'm sure there are others, but like that just like off the top of my head for some reason.
Okay, I gotta read it.
Yeah.
If someone could start doing just one thing for their health today, what would it be? Or what should it be, rather?
Well, it depends where you're at in your health. Like, for example, if you...
let's do 3 levels.
Okay, 3 levels. Well...
Novice.
Novice.
Like, they're the mac and cheese eaters for dinner.
Well, let's say... Okay, so level 1 would be like, if you smoke, which is, I think, one of the worst things that you can do, cigarettes, quit smoking. Nothing that you do for your health is going to be as beneficial by a long shot as quitting smoking. So quit smoking if you smoke. The next level would be if you are obese. Nothing that you do for your health, no supplement that you take is going to be as beneficial for your health as getting to a normal, healthy weight. So that's level 2. Level 3 would be exercise. If you're currently sedentary, I mean, I love to talk about nutrition. I'll talk about nutrition all day till the cows come home. And there are many ways up this sort of nutritional mountain, so to speak, to get to whatever the goal is that you want. But if you're currently sedentary, exercise is medicine for every organ system. It's like, some of the way that drugs work, for example, pharmaceutical drugs, it's like taking like a single molecule to a single problem. That's like how Western medicine works, right? Exercise is like taking a shotgun to your problems because it just affects all these different pathways. Everything.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really impactful. Okay, so that's level 3. Do we have a level 4?
Level 4.
Like extra credit.
Extra credit. I would say if you're currently on a vegan diet.
Oh my God. Here we go.
Yeah. At least like eat eggs a couple times a week. Please. For the love of you, for the sake of your health and everybody around you.
Oh my God. Okay, Max. This has been a pleasure. Tell everyone where they can find you.
So I'm super active on Instagram at Max Lugavere, MaxLugavere. And then I host my own podcast called The Genius Life. So
it's
come over
really
and say what's up. Thank you.
And your books.
So my last book just came out. It was called Genius Kitchen. Highly recommend that. It's like a 2-part book. It's a wellness guide as well as cookbook, and we've got like beautiful photography in it. And then I have 3 books out now. So I would say Genius Kitchen or my first book, Genius Foods, are 2, you can't go wrong starting with either of those books.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.